Coming up on The Daily with me, Niall Paterson. Sky News has investigated concerns of neglect in care homes for older people. Why is care in homes the regulator rates as good often anything but?
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kelnick.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
To place someone you're close to in a care home is no small thing. You're entrusting your mum, your dad, or similar to the safekeeping of others, a not insignificant step in itself. Then there are the costs, which, of course, are eye-watering. But which of us wouldn't pay, if we could, to ensure that the last years of their life are spent warm, safe, and well? Now, as we've described on the podcast previously, the problem is that on many occasions, that level of care just isn't there. And a Sky News investigation has discovered huge problems with how concerns about care homes are investigated and the way in which these homes are rated by the Care Quality Commission. Becky Johnson is Sky's social affairs correspondent. Becky, just tell us what you've been finding out over the past couple of months.
Well, we have been speaking to numerous families who have had relatives in care homes, in some cases still have relatives that they're still alive in care homes, where they've got really serious concerns and some quite horrifying stories. And of course, it's horribly upsetting for people because they feel quite helpless, because when they try to raise concerns, that's where they come up against this brick wall, some people describe it, where they just feel that they can't get accountability.
So just give us a few examples of the care or lack of care that people have been complaining about.
We spoke to a woman who said that every time she went to visit her mother, and that would be daily because she was so concerned, she'd find bruises on her mother, and staff wouldn't always be able to explain how those bruises had got there. And
these, I've seen them. These aren't small bruises.
These are large.
Are huge. They're dark, almost black, in fact.
Really alarming bruises. And in that case as well, some months, this woman was barely taken out of bed. In fact, for 18 months, there's no record of her having a bath or shower, simply bed bath. And these are the kind of stories that you hear repeated time and again. A real lack of basic hygiene, people not being able to always reach the food and drink that they need, a lack of respect. And then in one case, maggots discovered in a wound.
Sorry, what?
Maggots, yeah.
Live maggots.
Discovered in a wound, a skin cancer wound of an elderly lady, an elderly dementia patient. And they called this woman's nephew to say that they had found maggots. They then sent an email with a photograph showing that the maggots had been removed. But he was left utterly shocked that that could happen. She was in an extremely expensive nursing home where he thought that she would get the best care, and he just couldn't understand how that could have occurred.
Becky, let's just use that as an example and try and paint a picture of who ultimately is responsible for ensuring that the care in care homes is of an appropriate standard.
It's a really complicated system, and I think this is a large part of the problem. So in the case
of Kathleen, the woman with dementia who had those maggots in her wound, what happened there?
So her nephew went to the local government and social care ombudsman. That is where you are advised to go about an individual complaint, because although the Care Quality Commission, the CQC, is the regulator that awards the ratings to these homes, for individual complaints, it's the ombudsman. So he went to the ombudsman, and then there begins a lengthy process of investigation. Now, ultimately, in that case, the ombudsman didn't uphold that. So the care home in question had sought the advice of a tissue viability nurse who had advised that on rare occasions during heat waves, maggots can occur. And the Ombudsman then took that into account and therefore did not find fault in the way that this lady's wound was cared for.
In essence, saying that it was acceptable care, I would argue.
And that is where Kathleen's nephew takes issue, because this care home was rated good.
It's the ratings that I think will be bothering most people. The Care Quality Commission, the CQC, as you have mentioned, what is their role in this? If they are providing a grading for these care homes, presumably they are an organisation that one can complain to about the care in those care homes.
So individual complaints don't go to the CQC. People can raise concerns with the CQC. The Ombudsman can raise concerns with the CQC. Homes themselves can. Anybody can raise a concern. And indeed they do. And our data shows that some 70,000 almost concerns about various different issues were raised with the CQC in the last 2 years. Now, they would say, of course, it's not their job to investigate all of them. Some would be for homes to investigate, some would be for local authorities. But ultimately, our data shows that they only reactively went and inspected in 3.6% of cases.
Of 70,000 complaints, or concerns, I should say, less than 4% were ultimately investigated. And then what happened?
So they would say that investigations take all different forms. So they would say, well, in some cases we would have looked into it, but in terms of actually inspectors going in and having a look, 3.6% of cases, which is such a small proportion. And then in around a fifth of those cases, they did actually downgrade the homes. And the problem with all of this, of course, as many people listening will know, that when you're choosing a care home for a loved one, it's such a difficult decision anyway.
Hugely.
And really, you can't go and be a fly on the wall and know exactly what goes on in these places. All you have is that CQC rating. And therefore, if the CQC has rated a home as good, you would hope and pray that the care would be good. And this is what people are finding it's not. Now, we have spoken to the CQC, the man who's been leading inspections of adult social care. He apologised for the experiences that people we've spoken to have had, and he accepts they are not doing enough inspections. We know the number of inspections that the CQC carries out has more than halved since 2019. And I said to him, why? Why have you not been going in? And he said there were 3 reasons. One, a new IT system that they had implemented, which he said hasn't been working well for them.
Whatever that means.
Another, he said, has been poor management, an issue he said is being addressed. And the third issue, he says, is the allocation of staff to the amount of work.
In common parlance, we don't have enough people doing investigations.
But he accepted that the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care has described the CQC as not fit for purpose. He accepted that. He accepted that they need to improve. And I think this is what so many relatives will find frustrating, that if even the man leading inspections knows that they should be doing more, then why aren't they?
Thanks, Becky. We will be back shortly speaking to one campaigner about the failings at the CQC.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
We've covered the failings of the care sector many times here on The Daily, almost to the point where stories of neglect are, I'm afraid, nothing new, let alone shocking. But Becky Johnson's reporting shows not just the lack of care, but the lack of oversight of the care. Diane Mayhew set up the campaign group Rights for Residents after she was stopped from seeing her father in hospital during the COVID pandemic in 2020, despite him being very close to death. She developed PTSD as a result after he passed. Her partner and co-founder of Rights for Residents, Jenny, was that year similarly denied access to her mother in a care home. Diane takes up the story.
And it got to August, and when restrictions were eased for everybody else in society, even the carers that were providing personal care could go on holiday, eat out to help out, we were still sat the other side of a closed window trying to communicate with Jean, who had advanced dementia. And by that stage, she had declined beyond recognition. It was absolutely horrific. So we came away from that visit saying there must be other people who were in the same situation as us, who were feeling powerless to do anything. And we felt there'd be strength in numbers. And that's why we set up Rights for Residents, so that we could meet other like-minded people and make some noise, really.
So what then is the problem that you can see with the Care Quality Commission, the CQC? From where I'm sitting, 67,778 complaints raised over 2 years. Less than 4% of those were ultimately investigated. And if the CQC isn't investigating, how on earth are we supposed to know what is going on in these homes?
Well, we can't, and that's the big problem. And there's three main issues with the CQC. Number one, they don't investigate individual complaints. So when people raise concerns, they just gather them. And it just feels like it goes into the abyss. The second thing is that by their own admission, they've reduced the inspections.
I mean, the level of inspections has gone down from 2019, close to 16,000, 2023, less than 7,000. I mean, it's less than half.
Yeah. Exactly. So, they're not investigating individual complaints. They are gathering them and using that evidence when they make an inspection. But if they're not doing the inspections, then that's never coming to light. So it's a major issue. And the third thing is, if I'd raised a complaint against a care home, the care home are unlikely to contact me to give my feedback to CQC. Does that make sense? So the care home cherry picks who they contact to give feedback to the CQC. So they're not interested in, when we had the meeting with the local inspectors, and we had several families there, all had major issues and had loved ones in a care home for a number of years. Not one of them had ever been asked for feedback by the CQC, not once. So there's something drastically wrong. And we did say, why can't every family be contacted? And the answer we were given is, well, it's data protection. Well, schools manage it with Ofsted reports. Every parent is contacted. Every time we raised issues of concern, they just say, we can't comment on that. It's an individual case.
Give me an example, if you can, Diane, of people who have approached you and raised issues, and the way in which the CQC has engaged with you.
So this particular home had been inspected 5 times by the CQC, and every time they got the rating requires improvement. Now, to me, there's something drastically wrong with the system that gives 5 requires improvement ratings.
And doesn't compel them to improve on top of it.
Exactly. So surely that home that have had all these reports should either move to inadequate, or on the other side of it, they should have moved to good. But they didn't do any of that in any of those inspections. And it just feels that the CQC are letting everybody down, not just the families, but also some care providers who, for whatever reason, they have had a requires improvement rating, but they're doing everything they can to improve that situation. But the gap between that inspection and then the CQC going in again is so wide, they're just left with that rating. We've got a regulator that's not regulating. It just seems absolutely unbelievable. What we're hearing on Rights for Residents is, if someone raises complaints, in many cases, the care home can be very, very defensive about that. And then before you know it, that person's served a notice to quit. And all they have to say is, sadly, we can no longer meet your loved one's need. So you become the problem because you've made that complaint. So people don't feel protected.
OK, Diane, let's bring Becky back in at this point. Because, Becky, there was that report into the CQC, and a damning one at that, presented to the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care last October.
Yeah, and that concluded poor operational performance is impacting the CQC's ability to ensure that health and social care services provide people with safe, effective and compassionate care. I mean, this is really damning. It said there's a lack of clarity regarding how ratings are calculated. It also said overall ratings for a provider may be calculated by aggregating the outcomes for inspections over several years. So again, it introduces this idea that what we don't get is a real up-to-date picture when we see that rating. It could be years out of date.
None of which is to say that uniformly care is bad when it comes to older people. There are places up and down the country where your loved ones would be looked after very, very well indeed. But I'm struggling as to where the problem is here, whether it is with the CQC for not carrying out enough inspections, or it is for those care home providers who are simply not doing their job.
I think the issues are really complex. There are workforce issues. Care homes struggle to recruit and retain. You know, it's
a difficult job. It's a difficult
and it's
job.
poorly paid.
Yeah.
It's difficult work. There's a whole myriad of reasons why care companies would say they would like to provide better care, but can't. But at the end of the day, we have a system that is supposed to regulate this sector. It's a sector in a country with an ageing population that more and more of us are going to have to rely on in those final years of life. And to think that the sort of things that we have discovered they're happening far too often. And when they happen, people try to shout about it and end up feeling like they're just running into a brick wall.
Diane, final word. Do you get the impression that the government know the extent, the scale of the issue?
They are aware of the problems, yeah. And they do think that we need a regulator with more teeth. And I know that from meetings that we've had. But what happens to people who are in this situation right now? Who's helping them? No one. You know, they've got nobody to turn to. If your mum was in a care home now and you had a critical situation and the CQC aren't prepared to investigate because it's an individual case, then there should be an emergency helpline that you could go to raise that alarm, because in some cases, unfortunately, it can be too late. And it's just so wrong.
Diane, Becky, many thanks. That is your lot for this edition of The Daily. For more from Becky on this topic, head to skynews.com. We are back again tomorrow.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.